When we say that global victories are negotiated and never gifted, we are drawing attention to the deeper mechanics of international power, mechanics that rarely appear on television screens or in official press statements. Nations do not act out of kindness, they act out of strategy, pressure, and the need to secure advantage in an increasingly competitive world. When the United States grants tariff discounts to India, it is not a gesture of goodwill. It is a calculated response to a changing geopolitical landscape in which India's leverage has grown dramatically. This leverage did not emerge overnight, nor because another country simply offered it. India built it through deliberate economic decisions, diversified alliances, and the confidence to refuse one-sided arrangements. Every major diplomatic concession, whether tariffs, trade access, strategic partnerships, or defense agreements, is the product of negotiations shaped by power balances, and power balances are never static. Countries like India have learned that in order to negotiate favorable results, they must project independence, capability, and strategic value. India's active engagement with multiple global blocs has created a situation in which each major power wants something from it and cannot afford to push it away. This multiplies India's bargaining strength. The US is not shifting tariffs because it discovered new affection for Indian industries. It is shifting because it recognizes India's importance in global supply chains, its population strength, its growing consumer market, and its geopolitical influence in a region where power is being contested. Negotiations reflect these realities, not personal friendships between leaders or diplomatic exchanges filled with polite language. Behind the scenes, experts calculate economic losses, strategic risks, alliance shifts, and long-term consequences. Only when the benefits outweigh the cost does a powerful nation make concessions. If victories were truly gifted, smaller nations would routinely receive favorable treatment, but that is not how global politics works. Influence flows from leverage, and leverage flows from necessity. When the US sees India partnering with Russia for energy stability or engaging with China in trade and regional forums, it recognizes that India has options. Nations with options negotiate harder. Nations with options extract better deals. Nations with options do not accept pressure tactics as easily. India's refusal to align completely with any one camp forces major powers to adjust their strategies. That adjustment often comes in the form of economic incentives designed to keep India within a certain sphere of influence. Negotiated victories also reveal how international diplomacy is shaped by unspoken understandings. Both sides know what the other wants and what the other fears. Both sides measure how much pressure the other side can withstand, and both sides understand the symbolic value of each concession. When the US lowers tariffs, it sends a message that India's economic and geopolitical position matters. It signals that the cost of ignoring or sidelining India has become too high. This is not a gift. It is a strategic calculation rooted in bargaining dynamics that reflect a world undergoing profound shifts in power. The growing influence of the Russia-India-China alignment represents one of the most significant shifts in global power dynamics in the 21st century. It is not a formal alliance in the traditional military or economic sense, yet its impact is undeniable. The three nations collectively represent a massive portion of the world's population, resources, manufacturing capabilities, and strategic geography. When they cooperate, even loosely, the balance of global power naturally tilts. This cooperation does not mean perfect harmony or lack of disagreements. Rather, it means each country recognizes the value of maintaining channels of coordination in areas where their interests align. And when these three nations align on even a few strategic issues, the ripple effects are felt by every major power, especially those accustomed to setting global rules without resistance. The strength of this alignment comes from the distinct but complementary roles each nation plays. Russia provides immense natural resources, energy stability, and a long-standing strategic approach that challenges Western dominance. China brings industrial capacity, technological growth, global infrastructure investment, and economic momentum. India contributes a rapidly growing economy, a massive skilled workforce, a unique geopolitical position between East and West, and the credibility of being one of the world's largest democracies. These factors combined create a triangle of influence capable of reshaping global institutions, redirecting trade flows, and offering alternatives to historically Western led systems. This is crucial because global power is no longer defined solely by military might. It is increasingly shaped by economic partnerships, supply chains, energy routes, and political cooperation. What makes this alignment particularly influential is its flexibility. It does not require a rigid structure or a single shared ideology. Each country maintains its independence while leveraging the presence of the others to strengthen its own negotiating position. This is especially true for India. By keeping strategic relations open with both Russia and China, India increases its diplomatic value on the world stage. The United States and European nations must consider this triangular relationship when crafting economic or geopolitical strategies related to India. The stronger the alignment appears, the more leverage India gains in securing favorable terms from the West. This does not mean India is tied to Russia or China. It simply means India has other partners available, which changes the entire bargaining framework. The very existence of the Russia-India-China alignment challenges the old assumption that global leadership naturally flows through Western institutions. It signals the emergence of a multipolar world where different centers of power coexist and influence global outcomes. When three of the world's most significant nations coordinate, even quietly, their combined economic gravity forces major powers to rethink their strategies. The U.S. must now calculate not just what India wants, but what India could alternatively receive from Russia and China. This increases India's value and bargaining power while simultaneously reducing the ability of any one power to dominate global decision-making. The RIC alignment thus functions as a subtle but powerful counterweight, reshaping global politics not through dramatic declarations, but through the steady recalibration of influence, partnerships, and economic realities. The United States does not offer tariff concessions without a strategic reason, and understanding why it stepped back requires looking beyond economics into the deeper layers of geopolitical competition. At first glance, tariff cuts look like a simple trade adjustment, but in reality they are an instrument of influence. Washington recognizes that India's global importance has grown, and as a result, it must adapt its approach to maintain a favorable relationship. The U.S. is aware that India today is not the same country it negotiated with 20 years ago. It is now a crucial player in global supply chains, a rapidly expanding consumer market, a technological competitor, and a nation capable of partnering with multiple global powers simultaneously. These factors make India's alignment increasingly valuable, and that changes how the U.S. negotiates. The deeper concern for Washington comes from the shifting global landscape. As Russia, India, and China strengthen their interactions in trade, energy, and regional security platforms, the United States sees the possibility of losing strategic ground. This is not about India becoming hostile to the West, but about India having alternative options, options that reduce American leverage. When a country has choices, it negotiates from strength. When it lacks choices, it negotiates from dependence. India clearly belongs to the first category. The U.S. understands this reality, and tariff cuts are a tool to prevent India from leaning too far toward the other centers of power that are rising across Eurasia. Washington also cannot afford to misjudge the symbolic value of cooperation with India. In a world where global leadership is being contested, alliances are no longer guaranteed, they must be maintained. The U.S. seeks India as a partner in technology, security, and regional balance, especially in the Indo-Pacific region where competition with China is intensifying. If India drifts closer to Russia or enhances its economic alignment with China, the U.S. loses influence in a region that is central to its long-term strategy. Tariff reductions, therefore, are not merely economic incentives, they are diplomatic signals meant to reinforce partnership and reduce hesitation. They are a way of saying that Washington values the relationship and is willing to adjust long-standing trade policies to sustain it. Another dimension lies in domestic American interests. U.S. companies increasingly rely on India as an alternative to Chinese manufacturing, a source of skilled labor, and an expanding consumer base. Maintaining favorable economic ties helps ensure that American businesses remain competitive in a rapidly transforming global market. The U.S. government must consider the demands of its own corporations, which see India as essential for future growth. Tariff concessions help smooth the path for business expansion, making India more accessible and strategically aligned with American economic goals. Additionally, geopolitical pressure plays a quiet but critical role. The U.S. has watched India resist Western demands to limit energy and defense cooperation with Russia. Instead of confrontation, Washington is choosing incentives. Offering tariff relief helps counterbalance Russia's energy influence and China's trade partnerships, giving India more reasons to stay closely connected with the U.S. rather than drifting further into alternative economic systems. This approach reflects the broader strategic calculation that maintaining a strong relationship with India is more valuable than enforcing rigid trade barriers. In essence, the tariff concessions reflect a recognition that the world is shifting toward multipolarity. The U.S. cannot simply demand compliance, it must persuade, accommodate, and adjust. The fear of losing influence, the desire to maintain India as a key partner, and the pressure of global competition all combine to make tariff reductions not just an economic decision, but a strategic necessity. India's ability to balance multiple global powers is one of the most remarkable features of its modern foreign policy, and it has become a defining factor in its rising geopolitical stature. Unlike many nations that align themselves tightly with one bloc or ideology, India has adopted a strategic posture that prioritizes independence, flexibility, and national interest over strict alliances. This balancing act is not accidental. It is the product of decades of experience and a clear understanding that long-term influence comes from maintaining relationships with all major power centers while avoiding overdependence on any single one. India's interactions with the United States, Russia, and China demonstrate this strategy more clearly than anything else. It cooperates economically with China despite border issues, maintains deep defense ties with Russia despite Western pressure, and engages in advanced technological and strategic initiatives with the United States. Each relationship serves a distinct purpose, and together they allow India to maximize benefits while protecting sovereignty. The strength of India's approach lies in the fact that it resists the zero-sum mindset that often dominates global politics. Rather than choosing either or, India chooses and it trades with China while competing strategically. It buys oil from Russia at discounted prices while partnering with the U.S. on critical technologies, and it participates in Western-led forums while maintaining influence in organizations where Russia and China play leading roles. This ability to move fluidly across geopolitical environments reflects India's understanding that the world is no longer dominated by one superpower. Instead, power is distributed across multiple regions, and each offers opportunities as well as risks. By keeping doors open on all sides, India ensures that no single nation can dictate its choices or limit its strategic room to maneuver. This balancing strategy also enhances India's negotiating power internationally. When India sits down at the table with the U.S., it does so knowing that it has strong ties with Russia and economic integration with China. When it speaks with Russia, it brings with it the economic and technological weight of its Western partnerships. When dealing with China, it participates not as a country isolated by Western pressure, but as a nation courted by the West for technology, trade, and regional stability. Every relationship strengthens the other, creating a cycle of leverage that very few countries can match. This is the heart of India's strength. Others need India more than India needs to fully commit to them. Economically, the benefits of this balancing act are enormous. India can source energy from Russia at favorable rates, import critical technology and investment from the United States, and integrate into China-centered regional supply chains where necessary. This diversified approach protects India from global disruptions and ensures resilience. Politically, it gives India the autonomy to act on its own terms, whether in regional security, trade decisions, or foreign policy statements. Instead of becoming a junior partner to any great power, India positions itself as an independent pole in an increasingly multipolar world, respected by all sides and constrained by none. This strategic independence is what enables India to extract concessions, like tariff discounts, from major powers while continuing to advance its own national interests without compromise. The world is undergoing a profound transformation, shifting away from an era dominated by a single superpower toward a landscape where multiple nations hold significant influence. This transition toward multipolarity is not an abstract theory, but a visible reality shaping trade, diplomacy, technology, and global decision-making. The US-India tariff adjustment is just one example of how major powers are recalibrating their policies in response to this evolving structure. For decades, global politics operated in a framework where one or two nations could set the terms of engagement, define acceptable behavior, and shape international institutions according to their own priorities. Today, however, the rise of new economic centers and strategic partnerships has begun to erode the simplicity of that structure. Countries across Asia, Africa, and South America are asserting themselves, forming new alliances and resisting pressure that once would have been unavoidable. India's rise plays a central role in this shift. Its growing economy, population, technological capabilities, and strategic location have made it impossible to ignore. But India is not alone. China's economic power, Russia's energy and military influence, the expanding roles of the Gulf states, and the increasing activism of regional organizations all contribute to a more complex distribution of power. In a multipolar world, no single nation commands absolute authority. Instead, influence is negotiated, contested, and distributed across several centers, each competing for partnerships, markets, and strategic footholds. This forces even traditional powers like the United States to adjust their approach. When the US makes concessions to India, it is acknowledging that persuasion now requires flexibility, incentives, and respect for a partner's autonomy rather than unilateral expectations. The shift toward multipolarity also changes the behavior of emerging powers. Countries like India recognize that they no longer have to choose one side or accept unequal arrangements. They can negotiate from strength, playing multiple partners against one another to extract benefits that would have been impossible under a unipolar system. This creates a more fluid global environment where diplomatic relationships are dynamic rather than fixed. Nations seek cooperation where interests align and maintain independence where they do not. India's ability to buy energy from Russia while collaborating with the US on technology is a direct expression of this new freedom. Similarly, the formation or strengthening of groupings like RIC, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and regional economic partnerships demonstrates how countries are building platforms that dilute the dominance of any single global authority. Multipolarity also reshapes economic policies and global trade norms. The world is no longer reliant on one primary source of manufacturing, one dominant reserve currency, or one path to development. Instead, countries diversify partners, supply chains, and financial systems. This diversification provides more leverage and reduces vulnerability to sanctions or economic pressure. For India, this means greater confidence when negotiating trade terms. The US must consider what India might gain from alternative relationships, whether with Russia for energy, China for market access, or the Middle East for investment. This interdependence creates a more balanced form of globalization where no country can easily impose its will without facing consequences. Ultimately, the transition toward a multipolar world is visible in every major diplomatic and economic decision being made today. It reshapes alliances, alters incentives, and compels powerful nations to negotiate on more equal terms with rising states. India's growing leverage and the tariff concessions it has secured illustrate how this emerging world order is transforming not only global power structures but the strategies nations use to navigate them. India's growing geopolitical leverage is becoming one of the defining features of modern international relations, and the recent tariff concessions from the United States highlight exactly how far this leverage has expanded. These concessions are not merely technical trade adjustments, they are signals of recognition. They demonstrate that India's position in the global system has strengthened to the point where powerful nations must respond to its strategic importance. In past decades, India often found itself as a recipient of fixed terms dictated by stronger economies. Today, the dynamics have shifted. India negotiates from a posture of confidence, backed by economic expansion, global partnerships, demographic strength, and a carefully balanced foreign policy that keeps all major powers engaged. Nations no longer view India as a regional player, they view it as a central actor shaping global outcomes. India's leverage is rooted in several interconnected factors that reinforce one another. Its massive consumer market attracts global corporations and governments seeking economic opportunities, while its rapidly growing technological sector positions India as a future hub for innovation and manufacturing. At the same time, India's geopolitical position in the Indo-Pacific region gives it strategic value in counterbalancing China's rise, something the United States and its allies consider critical. This combination of economic and strategic importance forces other nations to adopt a more accommodating approach. When the U.S. reduces tariffs, it is acknowledging that cooperation with India is too valuable to jeopardize through rigid trade barriers. India's importance cannot be ignored, and that recognition translates into diplomatic and economic advantages. Another dimension of India's leverage comes from its ability to maintain diverse partnerships without compromising its independence. India's relationships with Russia, China, the United States, the European Union, and the Middle East create a web of connections that enhance its strategic weight. Each major power understands that pressuring India too aggressively risks pushing it closer to another camp. This balancing skill gives India room to maneuver, enabling it to secure better terms in negotiations. The tariff discounts from the U.S. are a direct example of how India benefits from this flexibility. The U.S. must consider India's access to Russian energy, China's economic presence, and the growing influence of alternative multilateral platforms like RIC. These considerations give India leverage that simply did not exist in earlier decades. India's growing role in global supply chains further strengthens its negotiating position. As companies and governments seek alternatives to concentrated manufacturing in East Asia, India becomes a natural choice for diversification. This trend increases India's value to the West, especially as supply chain security becomes a top global priority. When a nation becomes essential to the stability of industries, technology flows, and regional security, other powers adjust their behavior accordingly. The tariff concessions illustrate this shift. The U.S. aims to deepen economic ties, ensure loyalty in critical sectors, and prevent India from drifting toward rival influence spheres. India's diplomatic behavior also adds to its leverage. Rather than adopting aggressive rhetoric or accepting one-sided partnerships, it pursues a pragmatic approach, seeking benefits while maintaining autonomy. This approach earns respect and makes cooperation easier for other nations. In a world increasingly shaped by competition between major powers, Countries like India that maintain neutrality, flexibility, and strategic independence become highly valuable partners. The U.S. tariff discounts can be seen as an attempt to secure India's goodwill during a time when global alliances are fluid and unpredictable. India's geopolitical leverage, therefore, is not a theoretical concept, but a practical force that influences real decisions by powerful nations. It reflects India's transformation into a significant pole in a multipolar world capable of influencing negotiations, shaping global agendas, and securing advantages that align with its national interests.